Third time is the charm. We're doing this conversation on endometriosis if it's the last thing we do today. So everyone, I am doing this now the third time, but we are talking about endometriosis. I'm going to be chatting with April Summerford. She's the founder of Beyond Endo. And we are talking all about her story. We're going to talk about diagnosis, treatment, taking the natural route. We're going to talk about surgery, the birth control pill, all the things, and many of the questions that you all asked. So let's try this again. We are so sorry. So what's up with whatever? My phone, my internet, I'm not entirely sure, but we will try and make this happen one more time. All right, hi.
Okay.
The charm.
You look really clear, so I'm hoping, I'm just gonna, yeah.
You look really clear too, so we're gonna make this work. Okay, all right. So we had started with your story. I would love for us to start there so that everyone can relate to what it is that you're going through or have been going through, because you obviously now live your life. And I think that that's the goal for all women. So let's get into that part first.
Okay, so short version, did have painful periods in my teenage years, all through high school and college. Wasn't until I was in my early to mid 20s that it actually caused a problem. And I was like, okay, I can't even function now. I couldn't take just a Motrin or an Advil and make it go away. Debilitating pain, couldn't get off the couch. And I'm a very optimistic, person. So I'm like, this is not like me to just be on the couch, like can't get out of the couch. What's going on? And my husband was really concerned because he's like, you aren't like this at all. Like, you're a go-getter. So I'm concerned about your health. Like, what's going on? So I was taking on a lot at work. I was getting my master's degree. I think some of that did play in, especially in retrospect. I wasn't taking the best care of myself. I had no idea about nutrition. I was eating pot pies for dinner, and I cringe to think about the things that I was trying to eat.
I can so relate.
I was eating pot pies before taking my master's, homework to bed, kind of. It was like really not healthy. But I was, it's just so bad. I was doing all of that, and then what happened is I tanked so bad that I went to my doctor again and was like, no, this isn't a normal, like, you tell me pain is normal, but this is like, I can't function. So it's at what point is pain is normal turns into I can't even get off the couch or out of bed. That's not normal. And so she said, well, we should investigate then. We should look into this. And she had and I want to dissect this a little bit. She had a really interesting perspective about endo. She was concerned about even saying it to me or diagnosing me with it because she thought it was going to be like a life sentence. And so in some ways, I wish she wouldn't have had that perspective, because maybe we would have gotten the solution 5 years earlier, maybe 10 years earlier, which would have been nice. But instead delayed the diagnosis because she was concerned about the fact that she didn't know about effective treatments for it. So she just said, well, we're not going to say that word. It's like a dirty word kind of a thing. We're not going to say endometriosis. And then we're going to go give you a scan for your gallbladder. And I'm like, okay, well, I've been in pain with my uterus for years, but my gallbladder is more important. It was very weird. So I finally got my scans. I did have a cyst. That led her to believe, well, okay, something's off. Let's go a little further. Sent me to the local OB who was a specialist. I say quotes, he was not a specialist. He treated women who are delivering babies. I was frequently sitting next to women who were pregnant. It was actually quite hard for me because I was going through infertility as well. And like sitting next to all these beautiful pregnant women, I was like, this is really, really harsh. And so what he did do for me is gave me a diagnosis, because we did do a laparoscopic surgery, but he didn't treat it effectively. So he did do burning cautery surgery. And I actually got worse after that. So I had a diagnosis, but I got worse. So then I basically, he gave me a prescription of Lupron, and I read all of the side effects. And I was like, I don't think this man understands what I'm trying to do in the world at all. And I literally wrote off, I quit. I said, I ripped up his prescription. I called his office, take me off your list. Don't call me ever again. I'm done. So that led me on my 4-year journey of basically teaching myself, because I know how to read research. I was in business research. I frequently taught at the university local business research classes. So I know how to read a PubMed article. I have no problem taking it down, So I PubMed myself till 2 a.m. for 4 years reading about nutrition. There wasn't like you and all these wonderful people that have popped up yet, right? I was like late night, like reading PubMed, like what's out there, So I'm reading nutrition, I'm reading about the immune system.
Thank God for people like you.
Well, and I'm nerd. I love it, so I don't mind. But if I'm in pain, my superpower is, well, I'm going to go learn about how to get out of this. That's how I think. Everyone's different, but that's how I function in the world. So I was like late night PubMed. So 4 years, finally found relief. And I was actually at a new job where I got to travel the world. It's my favorite job so far. So much fun. Flew all over the place, and was able to do that still without white excision, which is kind of amazing. That's with nutrition, supplements, and like actually taking better care of myself, better sleep patterns, stuff like that. And then in 2017, I met a true specialist. He gave me white excision because I was still having like binding left-sided pain on my ovary that was really bothering me. and I knew something was wrong. So he immediately put up my pictures from my previous surgery and just ruined my life in a good way. It was like, well, you never even had a proper surgery. And he just explained it all to me. And I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, you still have endo in there. So still causing inflammation, still causing problems. I'm like, oh, okay. And so then after that surgery, I was able to continue all of the lifestyle interventions I did previously and find a sustainable way of living in the world. And so now I'm just, I just accumulate this information even more because it's so much fun to learn about the human body.
Like I said, thank God for people like you, because not everybody's so excited to learn about the human body.
Yeah.
So there's that. But thank you so much for talking about that, because I feel like you have been through it all, so to speak, as it relates to having endometriosis and just all of the things, the types of surgery, the changes on your own, trying to get the diagnosis, the struggle of being sort of gaslit by your doctor and being told that this stuff is normal. I mean, I feel like we hear these stories over and over again. And so what I would like to do is talk about what endometriosis is versus what it's not, because to this day there's so much confusion, and even just with doctors in general. I mean, so many doctors don't even know what endometriosis is, and if you just do a Google search, you'll find ridiculous amounts of misinformation. So I think that what it is, what it isn't, would be really helpful.
Yes, let's start there. And I want to explain,
Okay.
the tail end of my journey is after I woke up from surgery and found the answers that I really desperately needed. I kind of had this epiphany that I to keep this information to myself anymore, and I was going to somehow share it with the world. I just didn't know how that was going to play out. And then the pandemic hit, and I knew all the services were shut down, and women with endo are on the low, rung of the totem pole, which I understand. There's a lot of other needs, but that's why I started my Beyond Endo support group. I was like, okay, I have to give girls functional ways of surviving this pandemic with extra stress, and already having endo is crazy. So that's how I started, getting into this whole, like, well, I'm going to somehow get this information into the world. So with that, I'm happy to go into distinctions between what endo is and what it isn't.
Thank you. No, thank you for saying that. It's good to know. And we'll talk about that towards the end, like what your support options are for everyone as well, for sure.
Perfect. All right. So here's the deal. Endo is not the endometrium. So there's an old misconception, well, it's just the same thing as the lining of your uterus. It is not. And there's interesting things in pathology. The cells have undergone genetic and DNA changes. It's not the same cell. In fact, we like to not use the word cancer, because cancer is different. Cancer is like, now the cell is actively replicating itself with damaged DNA. Okay. So cell is more like a senescent, I'm going to get a little technical. It's more like a senescent zombie cell, meaning the body said, hey, that cell is no longer proper, and it marks it for cell death, but something's going on that the immune system isn't properly cleaning it up and removing it from the body. So it sits where it is dormant, because the immune system's smart. If a cell's going rogue, it shuts it down. It says, oh, you are no longer a functional cell. We're gonna shut you down. But it's not the later stage of that process where your body should be clearing it out naturally isn't happening. So that immune cell that marked it for cell death, now that lesion, that endo lesion, is actually causing local trauma and inflammation to the neighboring tissue, because it's not actually responding to signals of the body the way it should.
Right.
So it's like not
yeah. Oh, did I lose you? No? You're still there. Okay. No, I just said you're very helpful. Keep going. Yeah, keep going. This is great.
So it's not the endometrium. And with that said, we're finding more and more interesting studies coming out with, like, endo lesions tend to have higher levels of the macrophages, which are the immune moderators that come in and say, hey, you're not the right cell. Like, so your immune system there's something weird going on where the immune system knows this cell is not supposed to be there, but we can't figure out, and I don't know this, and the literature doesn't know this yet, if the cell itself is because the immune system inappropriately attacked something, or if the immune system attacked something that was legitimate there, like an infection or some sort of local trauma that it ran to the site to say, we have an issue here. But then for some reason, this is where the immune system part gets weird, it's not clearing those cells. So anyway, there's really interesting things about endo lesions. I've nerded out and looked at the pathology reports, and these cells have lots of weird things about them that are not like other cells.
Okay, can I just stop really quickly and just say that what you just described, no one has ever described it that way to me before. So that was crazy amazing. And also too, that these are not just bad periods, people.
No.
Like, this is not just a bad period. There's so much more going on here.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, carry on with your brilliance.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so what's next? So that
Oh, so yes, okay, so that's basically the cells that make up the endometriosis lesions, right? Essentially.
yes, and they are not.
Yes. Okay. And can we talk a little bit about the fact that, it's constantly been, and like I said, what it is and what it isn't. I feel like what it isn't is just a bad period or a painful period. So maybe talking about, how these particular cells, these lesions start to cause problems for us, and when those symptoms typically will show up.
Sure. So there's a myriad of debate on as to how these lesions got there in the first place. And some of it is helpful and some of it's not helpful when looking to treat it and to move beyond this problem. So Samson, that's the old
Yeah.
theory of retrograde menstruation. He thought that reflux tissue was getting out of the body and attaching itself in the other parts of the pelvis. Some people say that's completely improbable, that's not possible. And some people say that is actually a factor of what's going on. It's interesting because part of the reason why I think that all endo is not the same, and I think that's the other problem we're dealing with, kind of like we're starting to get smart in the mental health field about the fact that like not all forms of ADD are the same thing, or not all forms of, even bipolar disorder are the same thing. I don't think all endo is the same thing. So I think the reason why there's so misconceptions and confusion about all of these theories of origin is that I think that some women's endo is possibly cells probably laid down in the wrong place when they were born. There is actually some truth to that theory, it seems.
Like in utero? In utero, right? Yeah, okay.
And if we could get into the kind of fun, origin story of like why that happened, we have a higher level of toxins and dioxins in the environment, and whatever your grandmother was exposed to, your mom was exposed to, and you were exposed to, right? Because you were all in utero, right? It's really crazy.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
possible.
so cool.
There's a lay down of improper cells there that are like laying dormant, so to speak. There's also a possibility that some women are actually having issues with reflux tissue, because actually when they look at studies, women do have reflux tissue. It's just that the immune system knows how to go in, clean up that tissue and go, oh, well, that's from the last period, and it gets rid of it, right? Whereas with endo, something's happening where these lesions are forming, the immune system is not properly getting rid of these cells, and it's causing a larger problem, right, in the pelvis. So my point with that is, the interesting part about that whole process is whether or not your endo was laid down at birth or it came later about because of some sort of immune flare, infection, and some sort of local trauma. Because I've really seen a lot of women that even had like a skiing accident or a bicycle accident or some sort of like physical trauma happen to their pelvis that threw things off. So it seems like there could be all these different onsets of what endo is. When it's set off and your cells are not, and your immune system and your cells and your hormones are not working in conjunction with one another, you're going to have symptoms. You're going to have something. And some women don't have pain, but they do have other issues. They have other symptoms. So there are lots of ways of endo presenting itself.
Okay, this is so great. And so do the conditions have to be right for those cells to sort of start acting out, so to speak? Meaning, does there have to be an inflamed environment or something else going on for symptoms to start to show?
Yeah. So this is a big mystery for me, because I've collected not my story but a lot of other women's stories at this point. I've listened to a lot of women. And the odd thing is there are some women who have silent endo, and it's not a lower stage of disease, if that makes sense. So the surgeon goes in and they have frozen pelvis, like all of their organs are actually tied together. In fact, just this past summer, I was listening to a girl in my group and I was like, she doesn't have any pain. She doesn't have any of the regular bowel, urinary, or those types of symptoms, but something's wrong. Like I'm like, I think she has endo. So I referred her to the local to an actual specialist. And I said, go talk to the specialist, because he's been doing this for 30 years. He knows like what's going on. She did decide to have surgery, and she had one of the worst cases that he's ever seen in his practice of her organs being completely glued and fused together. And she had
oh my God, no kidding, that's crazy. So what happened?
Yeah, so she got that all cleared up and was able to, because she had mobility issues. She was having pain with like stretching and with exercise and things like that, but she didn't have any period pain or any bowel issues or anything like that. So once she had that all cleaned up, she's able to do all these lifestyle interventions now and get all of her other adhesions and inflammation in check, and she's doing really, really well now. So, and that she's young, so it'll help with her fertility options too, because obviously she was not going to be fertile with her fallopian tubes and her ovaries being tied to other organs in her pelvis. So now she has more choices in life than she would have previously. But yeah. The thing is, it's like, so some of us, like I had extreme pain since I was a kid, and I did have pain. So that's how I knew there was something wrong. But some people don't have pain, but there is still some sort of an immune inflammation problem that's being set off. My big vision in the world is like one day we'll have a really good diagnostic test that actually will give you markers. Like they'll look at inflammation, they'll look at your nutrient levels, they'll look at your genetics, and will actually be able to tell us, you're at a higher risk for endo, even if you have no symptoms, currently showing that this is a problem. And if we get it early, we could prevent a lot of these long-term traumatic, frozen pelvis type of situations. That's kind of my big dream one day, hopefully in the future.
That is the dream, sister. I agree with you completely. It's what we need to be aiming for. Why aim for anything less at this point? Right. So maybe, okay, that was so helpful. Can you talk a little bit about the symptoms again, so everyone is clear what they're looking for mostly? Maybe we can just talk about the more common symptoms.
Sure. Let's talk common. And then I do want to get a little nerdy and talk about some of the futuristic markers that there are doctors out there who will help pull these. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's do it. I wanted to talk about that when we were talking about testing for it and or diagnosis.
Yeah, well then I'll wait for that part. I'll just talk about this because I study this for all the time. So with the current symptoms, okay, painful period is not normal, as you teach and as you preach, and your books are wonderful. If you have a painful period, there's a reason behind it. It doesn't mean it's endo, but there is a reason. So we need to mark off all of our check boxes and see, once all the interventions have been done, if you're not receiving relief from those interventions, endo might be a problem that needs to be addressed, right? So painful period, never normal. Painful bowel movements is actually pretty frequent because the bowel involvement is right there next to the uterus, and it can tend to get stuck there.
Oh, there you are. Yikes.
Okay, can you
there?
So what?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do not know what is going on here. Anyway, it is what it is. We'll make it work.
I'm gonna leave and come right back because it's not showing the screen for me.
It isn't? Okay.
Yeah, I'll be right back.
You are. Okay, I can see you. Oh, shoot. Okay, we lost her. All right. I know. I agree. My doctor always said nothing is wrong. I know. So this is the time when you need to advocate hard for yourself, everyone. And I feel like when we're told consistently that the symptoms that we're experiencing, and we know deep down are not normal and don't feel right, we need to trust that. We need to trust that gut response and find a doctor who's going to work with us. And I know that that's not always easy, but I'm going to talk to April about that part too, about finding someone who can help. Okay. Hey, is everything okay?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. All right.
Phone keeps going dark during this, and I was tapping it to go light and tried to go somewhere else. So anyway, that was my fault.
Oh my God, okay. It's okay. All right. So we were talking about symptoms. So we're going to get into symptoms in the painful period. So we're getting there.
Painful periods, painful bowel movements, pain with urinary. So that's actually one that not a lot of people talk about. Pain with sex is a really big deal. Some women only present with pain with sex. In fact, I've met women that don't have painful periods, painful bowel, or painful urinary, but they do have painful sex. So there's something going on there. Also, infertility is a very high marker. In fact, I have some statistics that most women who have undiagnosed infertility, like all the other markers have been looked for, have some sort of endometriosis going on. And most likely some sort of, it's more of the result of endo. It's like those local lesions put out inflammatory markers and cause adhesions that impede with ovulation in the fallopian tubes. So typically that's actually the thing that's causing the infertility, or one of the markers for infertility for those women.
Yeah. Can we go back to what you said about like painful bowel movements? What does that feel like exactly? What's someone looking for with that?
Yeah.
Like on exiting, or just a general like stomach pain or lower pelvic pain? What are they looking for?
Great question. That's a great question. So the different, of course, everyone has a different experience. It depends on what's going on. So some women, it's only painful bowel movements with their period. Like I've heard it really gets bad with their period because there's a lot of them going on at that time, and other hormonal changes. But painful bowel movements with your period is an interesting symptom that I hear a lot with women with endo. Painful bowel movements in general, and I think those are typically because adhesions have gotten so bad that your bowel is actually structurally obstructed. So some women have bowel endo, where endo has invaded the wall of the bowel, and so the bowel is no longer actually situated where it should be, where, you know, everything's just kind of moving and floating through there. It's actually in a wrong place, so things get stuck. So yeah, it could be incomplete emptying, like completely have a full bowel movement, and that can be painful. And then also, I think there's an immune factor. So I've had painful bowel movements, but never had bowel endo, and it was because my immune system gets activated sometimes during certain times of the month. So it could also be immune mediated.
Okay, so generally speaking, it's, you know, it's more like abdominal bowel movement pain that one might feel potentially. I mean, because someone's asking about IBS, and we're going to get into that just so everyone knows. And someone's asking about ultrasound as well, so we'll talk about that too. But yeah, okay. I mean, I feel like that explained it really well. And other symptoms, I know there are a few others.
So I never had pain with the urinating, so I'm not really good at describing that pain. Probably who's had that pain that could describe it, but I would just say that there's different causes of urinary pain, and some of it could be pelvic floor mediated, which most women with endo have pelvic floor issues that need to be dealt with. So it could be that, or it could be IC, or it could be actually even endo invading the wall of the bladder. So there have been cases where women have had endo in the bladder wall, and of course that was causing extreme pain with emptying, things like that. So anyway, just be aware of whatever the symptoms. If you're having pain urinary, you know, with urinary, like if you can't pee without it painful, that's not normal.
Yeah, thank you. That's so helpful. And can we talk a little bit about some of the symptoms that one might not expect to have with endo? I feel like there are a few that are good for people to just know about. Because my understanding is that endo can grow in other parts of the body, and you know, it can cause problems with people's lungs, for instance. I've had multiple people say that to me. So I'm curious if you have thoughts to share on that part of things.
Yeah, so thoracic endo is very real. It's endo on your lung. And again, it's just to be clear, the case number on that one is pretty rare. So I always talk to women and they start to kind of freak out. Like, I don't want anyone to get anxiety about that. Like, it's a very rare case that someone would have thoracic endo. But for women who do have it, it typically presents cyclically, somewhere in the cycle. So they'll have pain on their chest, you know, during ovulation, or they'll have pain breathing during menstruation. And again, it makes sense because those cells are, even though they're broken cells and they're not quite doing what they're supposed to, they still kind of signal with the hormones. So during menstruation, when everything shifts, those cells are trying to bleed, so to speak, or they think they're trying to bleed, even if they're not, and causing immune activation. So your immune system's on high alert that those cells are not where they're supposed to be in your body. So I've heard of extreme cases of women having like trouble breathing during their period. And so that is a sign of thoracic endo, or it could be a sign of thoracic endo.
Okay, that's so helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we've got a lot of other things. Can we go on to, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my computer screen because I have it all listed out. I'm a nerd. First steps to diagnosis and treatment, because girl, I mean, I talk to a lot of women in other countries too, and the situation is even more challenging for them because they potentially live in a country where there is no doctor who knows anything about endometriosis, and there's nothing they can do but travel, which is obviously prohibitive financially for so many. So I guess, yeah, like the question for someone who might have access, and then maybe someone who doesn't, like what do we do for diagnosis?
Yeah, so this is where kind of like my visionary brain gets like really excited about like helping with situations that are much easier than surgery in the future, because that would be like a world changer for not just women in the US, but everywhere in the world. But we're not quite there yet. There's still a few issues with the diagnostic tests that are not surgical. that's really the biggest challenge we have, is that typically surgery, and the way we say in the US is technically you can't have a diagnosis of endo without a surgery. So that's the other challenge, is like there's this huge barrier. It's not like you can just take a blood test or you know, a saliva test, or even like a cervical mucus test. I mean, it would be ideal if we had something like that where women could know, like, well, your markers are kind of wrong, and let's look at this. That said, it gets complex, because then even getting a diagnosis from a doctor who does surgery is difficult. So I've had women that I've spoken with who've had surgeries with a general OBGYN who didn't know how to identify lesions, and he didn't know or she didn't know what they were looking for. So they closed them up and said, well, you don't have endo, you're good to go. And then she went on to have serious problems that say that otherwise. And then she goes to a specialist, and they're like, I went in and looked, and there's endo all over. I zoomed in, and, you know, I don't know what they were looking at, but there's endo scattered across the entire pelvis. So wow. We have a lot of challenges. We have the challenge of diagnosis, and then we have the challenge of proper diagnosis, like knowing that you for sure had a good look. And then we have the problem of treatment, because depending on the severity of case, there's literally less than 200 surgeons worldwide that can handle actually removing those lesions properly with white excision. So anyway, it's crazy. Yeah, it's a lot of problems. So on the lighter end, let's say I'm talking to someone across the world, and they're saying, you know, I don't have surgery. That's not in the cards for me. What do I do? I would still look into inflammation, because inflammation tells us so much about the body. It says something's not right, something's going on. And if you have elevated inflammation consistently, there's a reason for it. So that's helpful to look at. There's also a very reliable genetic marker on your HLA SNP. So I don't know if they could get access to some of the US like 23andMe tests or stuff like that. But if you look at your genetics will tell you a story of if you have a higher risk. It doesn't mean you have it, but you have a higher risk if you have certain genetics that are, you know, that have changes in them. So that could lead you down that trail of like, well, maybe surgery makes sense, or maybe I should save up money to travel to actually see a surgeon to have this dealt with. So anyway, that's kind of my dream in the future, is like we have like an actual diagnostic panel that women can take, and you'd know, like, yes, you have this gene. Yes, you have elevated this. Oh, HLA SNPs. It's the same genetic marker that women with celiac disease and those other autoimmune problems have. Women with endo typically have those genetic markers as well.
Funny how that works. Yep. Okay. So hopefully that's helpful. Yep. What are those genetic markers that we'd be looking for in 23andMe? I mean, 23andMe won't tell you that. Right. That's the other thing too. 23andMe is not going to tell you this. You're actually going to have the test interpreted through a system that's looking for those particular markers. Like I use a company called Nutrition Genome. I think they're great. That's been really helpful for me. But yes, if there's another one that you recommend too, I think Strategene is also another good one too for interpretation.
His tests. I just want something where we could get like, the endo data isn't connected to these things yet. So this is, again, my dream for the future, is that you would say, okay, like for example, on those tests I took, they said, well, you're at a higher risk of celiac disease, right? Which I don't have, but the higher risks of celiac disease also played into my higher risk of endo, but the test doesn't say that yet. So I kind of dream of a world where we would do something like that, mail it in, and it would come back and say, this is a higher risk for endo as well. So women would know, it's worth even looking for a surgeon.
Yeah, no, it makes so much sense. And I mean, it makes sense to us. Just because of what we know about, autoimmune disease in general, and upregulation of your whole system, your immune system in general, and like what triggers that. So it makes so much sense. And it would be incredible to see that. I agree. That's the dream. So in terms of anything else with regard to diagnosis, is there anything else you want to share about that? And we'll definitely get into the birth control question.
Yeah. I think, okay, so, I mean, with diagnosis, we're still in the climate. So I'll go back from my beautiful future and I'll come back to reality. Okay, in reality right now, there's very few people who understand how to properly diagnose endo and then how to properly treat it. So you're going to have to get a little aggressive with your strategy on how you talk to doctors. I always talk to women now the way I wish I would have talked to myself back then. So if I was talking to my younger self, I would say, don't listen too long to a doctor who says your symptoms are normal and that you should just live with them. Like, that's ridiculous. And you're going to waste years of your life, which is the most precious resource. It's like money comes and goes. friends come and go, but your lifespan is cut with whatever your lifespan is. So like losing 10 years is ridiculous. I shouldn't have lost. It drives me nuts. So
it's criminal. I agree.
It's like 10 years of my life. So, and that's how I know so much, is like I had to just study this for 10 years. It's like I didn't want a pretend PhD in this, but I have one because I had to survive how to get out of it. So it's like, if you have a doctor that's wasting your time, think of it like you would fixing a mechanic, like coming to your house or taking a car. If they tell you your car is broken and he says, oh, it's not broken, just say you're fired and move on to a doctor who listens to what you're saying, actually has real remedies and treatments for how to address it, and helps you get quickly to the more fine-tuned experts that can actually get you the proper treatments and move on with your life. So I'd say diagnose my.
No, I was just going to say 100%. Keep going. Yeah, I agree completely. It's like, no, we don't put up with bad haircuts, ladies. We definitely don't put up with bad visits with doctors. It's like, who can't help us? It's ridiculous.
I had like a tinging sound in my transmission. I took it to the mechanic and he was like, I'm sorry, lady, your car's fine. I'd be like, well, you're a bad mechanic. And I would drive my car somewhere else. So I don't know why I didn't have that mentality when I was going through this, but it's like, if I know that my body is telling me something's wrong and you're telling me it's not, then you're a bad doctor. Like, that's how this works. It's like, you're here to collaborate with me to help me find out what's going on, not to tell me nothing's going on. That's silly. It's a ridiculous discussion. So anyway, make sure you push back. If you have a doctor like I did, that's kind of old school, she's out here, she's very sweet, but she's out here in a rural town, so she doesn't stay up on her research. She doesn't really push hard to understand the cutting edge technology. If you have a doctor like that, you're going to probably have to go outside your local environment to find someone who's a little more up to date.
Sounds good. Okay, sounds good. So then from there, how does one get the diagnosis? So say you found this doctor and they're going to help you. What's the next step?
Yeah. So currently, none of these really awesome markers like actually exist in doctor's office yet. So you may find a pretty awesome doctor who may be using some of these things. And there are a few that I've met. So if you have one of those, awesome. If you don't, you might have to push for starting with the C-reactive protein test, looking at your inflammation, looking at your hormones. Hormones don't always tell the story of endo though, so it's kind of weird. So the hormones could be helpful, could not be helpful. Test your thyroid. The thyroid does help because the thyroid usually will tell a story of like, not doing so well, right? So this could help. And I'm trying to think of other markers that really helped me. Looking at immune function, there's different ways of kind of looking at if you have any high markers for certain reactivated, which is a root cause, reactivated infection. So I had a pretty bad reactivated Epstein-Barr infection. And so luckily, one of the early doctors, did you? Yes.
Yeah.
So what happened is I think when I got really, really sick and I couldn't function, it was actually the Epstein-Barr reactivation that was really putting me back on the couch and I couldn't get off the bed.
I had that happen too. Like 5 years ago almost. Yeah, 5 years ago. Same thing for a month. I could not function. It came out of nowhere. Nobody knew what it was. Doctors don't even know what Epstein-Barr virus is in terms of just how it shows up. I mean, I went to so many doctors and they were like, you should take some Advil.
Right. Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's like I'm having grinding fatigue and I can't function, but sure, let's take some Advil. So that, I think finding someone who kind of gets all this stuff is always helpful. If you can't find someone like that, I think getting some of these basic markers are helpful. And then once you start looking at those markers, what I realized is, okay, none of these things are actually, I still had this really bad low level inflammation. And I had a pretty good local doctor, a different doctor that said, yeah, no, you still have underlying inflammation and you've done everything to clean that up. So there's something else there. And to me, that was my endo, without an actual surgery. Then when I had the surgery, it was like the surgeon even thought that my case was going to be better than it was because I had done such a good job, maintaining other systems, that he thought, he put me third in line. I'm going to take care of you real quick. We'll just do a quick clean. We'll be fine. No. He was like, oh my goodness, you were stage 4 and you had, 3 hours and I had to get your ovaries off your pelvic sidewall and this was really bad. But because I had done such a good job with diet, lifestyle, and toxins, he didn't think I was going to be that bad because of my symptoms. So anyway, there's just he's an expert. He even thought you're fine. I'm just going to clean you up. It's like, oh God, it was worse than I thought, So your diet lifestyle really matters at getting your inflammation markers and all that down. But the surgery is what confirms what's actually going on in the pelvis.
Right. Yes. Okay. And that's a laparoscopic surgery.
Correct.
So can we talk about that just for a brief second? Because then we can move on to a bunch of other things. I know there's like a million questions.
Yes. So the laparoscopic surgery is, and that's the other thing that's interesting about this kind of evolution of endo, is my grandmother never had a formal diagnosis and my mother never had a formal diagnosis because laparoscopic surgery wasn't really mainstream until the 80s, which is when I was born. So
Yeah.
and the option of a laparoscopic surgery. And so when I finally learned about it, it's like in the 80s, they pioneered keyhole surgery where they no longer have to like cut, which is pretty barbaric. They used to have to like cut women open with a full open big incision. And they invented with laparoscopic that they would go in with just a few incisions. So that's what current diagnostic procedures are, is they go in through your belly button and they go in usually on either side of your lower pelvis below your bikini line, so that if you ever want to look cute in a swimsuit later, you should be able to see those scars. But they go in through 3 incision sites, or some people go in with 2 incision sites, depending on how they do it. And they look and see, one's for a camera and the other ones are actually for instruments to actually treat the tissue. It gets a little technical on what methods they're using when they're actually in there, but overall keyhole laparoscopic surgery just means the way they go in. So laparoscopically means they just use a few incision sites.
Right. Okay. And so then from there, okay, so you get your diagnosis and then we move on to treatment, which brings me to the questions that we've had. We've had multiple about the birth control pill, and that being it feels to me like the most common recommendation in the conventional medicine realm. And I've heard multiple things. I hear just like the regular, pill with ethinyl estradiol and some sort of progestin. So a combination pill or a mini pill, like progestin only pill. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. What you think about that as treatment and like whether that's sustainable. I mean, all the things, because so many people are on it.
Yeah. So here's my double-edged sword with birth control. My big beef with it is that when you prescribe, and this is why I have one of my posts recently on Instagram is like, one size does not fit all. When you try to get a remedy for everything under the sun, you have a remedy for nothing. It's just the way it works. It's like, so technically birth control is not a remedy, nor is it even an effective treatment for endometriosis. It's not getting at any of the root causes. It's not going to deal with the underlying systems that are out of balance. It doesn't do any of that. Now, what it does do for some, and I'll say for some, because again, we're all different and women respond differently.
Absolutely.
It might shut down pain for a time. And I will say there was about a year, even myself, where I took birth control because that's what the doctor told me too. She was like, well, just go into birth control, you'll be fine. So it did quiet down symptoms for me for about a year. But your body, here's what I've learned. Your body is really interesting. Your body keeps score. So I paid for that year, and I paid for it very hard later. And so I always kind of tell women, like, if you're going to use birth control strategically, use it for a short stint of time because, at the time I was finishing exams and was finishing my master's degree. So I use it strategically, like to shut down symptoms for a year so I could finish and then come back and go, okay, body, like, what's wrong? What do we need to do? But use it strategically, knowing deep down that this is not getting at any of the root causes. You're not actually treating anything. It's not going to stop progression of the disease. It's not going to stop, the underlying problems. It's just going to shut down your brain's ability to perceive sort of some of those issues going on for a period of time, right? If you're lucky. And I'll say it lasted for a year, and then my body wouldn't even let it last longer. It was like, yeah, I gave you a year. Yeah, no, now full-fledged inflammation was like really skyrocketing high, really sick again. And it was like birth control wasn't even close to helping it. So
I'm so happy you're saying this right now. I also am so happy you just said that it doesn't stop the progression of this disease, because if there was ever a myth, I feel like that's it. How many times have you had someone come to you and say that? Like, oh, my doctor said this. Yeah, no.
All the time. And there's a misconception. It's again, probably a talk for another day, because I went real deep on why that even exists. But there's this old myth, right? So it's based on another old myth, which is if you get pregnant, that stops endometriosis. And the problem is that that's not true either. So, and it gets, as you know, it gets complex, because even if we were to say, okay, let's say that being pregnant actually did stop endo and the immune system dysfunctions, right? And for some women, it shuts down systems. And I think that's because the way your immune system modulates during pregnancy. I think that's actually what we're talking about, is your immune system modulates during pregnancy. So it shuts down symptoms for some women. That's when then they decided, which makes no sense to me, that birth control is like pregnancy. And so we'll give you birth control and it'll be like pregnancy and it'll shut down your immune system. And it's like, well, actually birth control isn't pregnancy at all, as we know. It's not.
Right. Not even close.
Close. So it doesn't actually do any of those positive side effects that pregnancy would, if that was even the case. But so many women with endo I've met have had successful pregnancies and healthy babies and still have to have a surgery to have those lesions cleaned up because it's still there. So it just isn't true that it just magically like kind of like goes away with pregnancy.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that as well. Coming back really quickly to the diagnostic part of things before we move on. So can we just talk about the laparoscopic surgery as being the thing that officially diagnoses? Can we talk about that? Because there's a lot of people talk about diagnosis via ultrasound, or they'll say that my doctor ran a scan and told me I have endometriosis or whatever, and very flippantly, and then they were sent on their way. So can we just talk about that a little bit, just for clarification purposes for some people?
Yes. Okay. So again, barring my futuristic world that doesn't actually exist yet, so I really wish it did, but it doesn't. The only way to know you for sure have endo is the surgery. And the reason why, and I'll explain, is because endo lesions are actually tiny microscopic little things. And if you've ever, and I have, looked at surgery videos, and if you've ever looked at actually what endo looks like in the pelvis, it has to be, they have to go in and get very close to the tissue and magnify the tissue to even be able to see where these tiny little cells are causing, they cause weird little patterns. Like they can see the scar, they can see the interruption of blood flow in vessels and that kind of thing. So these surgeons are very meticulous people who are going in real close to look at these little cells that are causing these pretty serious body disruption issues, right? So there's pretty much no, and there's one exception, but I'll say there's no way you can diagnose something that microscopic with an ultrasound per se.
Right. Or an MRI or any other imaging.
Yes. Now, our imaging is helpful, and here's where there are experts, and I've watched them do this with ultrasound where they can see something. They can see that organs in the body are not properly moving and maybe having a movement issue, like because all of your organs should free float in your body, right? So good ultrasound people who know what they're looking for can go in and kind of see that maybe things aren't moving properly when they push around in the abdomen, and that could be a sign, but still, we're talking very speculative here. They can look and see if you have an endometrioma or a cyst, but if you don't have an endometrioma, a cyst, and there isn't that weird mobility thing going on, then ultrasound isn't going to show you a whole lot of things. It's like those are the three things that ultrasound is pretty good at.
Right.
MRIs give a little bit more information, but not much, because again, these are microscopic issues in the pelvis that are causing local inflammation.
Yes. Okay. That's so helpful. So I hope everyone is getting this. Someone just asked about, and we're going to get into treatments, but this is another one we hear all the time, is I'm having a hysterectomy to treat my endometriosis. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's all it is. So all these,
like it said, this is what we're offered. We're offered birth control or hysterectomy. It's like amazing. Really? Yeah.
So this goes into, one day I may have to write a book on this. I don't know that I have time to go deep enough to write a book as much as I'd want to do it the justice it deserves in the world to write a book on this. But you understand that the conventional system always pushes drugs or surgery because that's actually the way the system is designed financially. Just simply put. So the problem is that if a doctor were to do all of these kinds of things over the course of 5 to 10 years, they don't get paid a whole lot of money in the current system. So they don't want to like fine tune your genetics and fine tune, like the system isn't set up for fine tuning of body systems that are out of order. It's set up to get paid for surgery and get paid for prescribing drugs. That's the way doctors in the conventional system are paid. And it's a long, like I said, it's a book worth of like codes and all this kind of nerdy stuff, but it's how they're paid. So you have to understand that when you go to your OBGYN, they're thinking about how to get paid. And it's not a bad thing. They need to get paid, but they're thinking, so can I help you with a hysterectomy or can I help you with drugs? That's just how they think. So the hysterectomy goes back, actually way back to the whole fun wandering womb thing, and women have hysteria and, we're in pain because our womb is not situated properly and all that kind of weird stuff. So typically, the first old school conversation between a doctor and a woman was, well, I'll just take it out because it's bothering you, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
but not getting at all into the precision of like why your uterus is having problems or why you're in pain with your period. Like none of that really was a concern. So the issue with removing a uterus for endo specifically is that the endo lesions exist outside of the uterus. So, and this is, I really wish this story weren't true, but I heard this story too many times. I talked to women when I worked with a specialist where they had a hysterectomy and their pain didn't go away. And they were still in agonizing pain, not so much cyclically because they didn't have as much of the same cycle thing, but they were still in pain. And when the specialist went in to look, there was endo absolutely everywhere, because the way they do hysterectomies, if they're not doing them laparoscopically, they go in and they just pull the uterus out. So there was no one in there looking to see if there was cellular debris or things left behind in the pelvis, right? They just took the uterus. So this poor girl had endo growing, because it can exist without your uterus. So it's existing in her pelvis, causing trauma to her pelvic organs without a uterus. So she still had to have wide excision to remove that, basically. And I thought, well, your uterus actually has value beyond just reproduction. So it's kind of unfortunate that someone didn't just go in laparoscopically and remove all of her endo lesions and just gave her hysterectomy willy-nilly, telling her that would solve her problems. So theory of hysterectomy without wide excision, if a woman wants a hysterectomy, that's more of a personal decision with her doctor and informed consent. That's the way that should exist. Because if you decide you want a hysterectomy, that's fine. But I just would say make sure you're with a surgeon who knows how to also go in and do a good clean out of the endo tissue while you're there.
Yeah. And someone's asking about hysterectomy leaving ovaries. I mean, if anyone's getting a hysterectomy, I hope they're leaving their ovaries intact, because otherwise you're on hormone replacement therapy for a long time to come, especially if in your 20s or your 30s, which I hear about all the time too. I have 22-year-olds telling me that the doctor's telling them to get a hysterectomy. Like, what? Yes.
That one's like, okay, like the longevity of women when you take their ovaries is like quite a long period of time. Yes. Because sense that one of the reasons why, and there's a few reasons why we get to live longer than men biologically, but one of the reasons why we get a long life is because we actually have more mitochondria than men do. And most of that mitochondria is sitting right in those ovaries. So one of my big goals is to try to keep my ovaries for, till I die, because they're there helping me, get energy basically through all these different systems. If I take them out, I'm losing those cells. I'm losing those mitochondrial cells that produce energy. So I don't, and not to mention all the hormonal signaling, and that gets really complex, but I want to keep my ovaries. So yes, if you're going to have hysterectomy, try to keep your ovaries. If your ovary obviously is severe issues, again, everyone's different. If there's something going on where that ovary is going to kill you, then yes, remove it. But it shouldn't, it's done way too cavalier, where they go in and say, well, we'll just do a total hysterectomy, we'll take your ovaries and everything. And at, like you're saying, ridiculously young women, there's girls I've talked to who are in their 20s and then later regretted it because they wanted to have kids. And it's like, even for their longevity, they should have been given other solutions before that was because that's a very serious long-term solution.
I completely agree with that. And someone's saying, like, isn't hysterectomy, oh, no, sorry, I'll get to that in a second. But if ovaries are gone, endo's gone. And I'm like, no, it's actually not. If you have the endo growing in some other part of your pelvic cavity.
Correct.
So maybe you said this earlier, it can be on the bowel, the rectum, the bladder. I had a friend who it was all over her bladder, and it took her like 2 years to recover from her surgery. I think she had to have 2 surgeries. So it can be everywhere. So that's, again, this is a common misconception. I always say this, that endometriosis is not a problem with your uterus at all. Like, your uterus is just responding to the problem externally, and it's showing up in that way. So everyone really, we need to know that. And then someone was saying, isn't hysterectomy only useful for adenomyosis? And I mean, that's a problem with your uterus itself. So it's not totally different, but it's a different condition. I also, like you just said, I'm like really hesitant to say, oh yeah, get that hysterectomy. Like, you've got to, what's causing the uterus to do that in the first place? Like, this is the question I have over and over again. Like, shouldn't we be asking that?
Yes, we should. And one of my theories with Ado is that there is local inflammation that is causing trauma to those tissues, because Ado, is, for people who don't know, is endo lesions inside the uterine wall itself. So that's why in those cases, sometimes it is appropriate to do a hysterectomy, because there is cells inside the uterine lining. So the problem with that, though, is I still am curious about the reason behind that. And I do think some of it has to do with microbiome imbalance in the uterus itself. And I get curious about, like, could that also be an easy fix in the future? Like, we're starting to map our gut, we're mapping our mouth really well now. We're starting to map all these systems and understand.
The vaginal one, yeah, as well.
And
yes, absolutely. I'm fascinated by this endlessly.
Yeah, and I'm like, I bet you there's something there. There's probably a pathogen or something that's causing local inflammation to cause those cells not to react properly. So instead of taking the whole organ, again, I'd love a world where we do a swab and we look at the actual microbiome diversity of your uterus.
Amen, sister. Yes, thank you for saying that. Okay, so yeah, we're talking about fibroids. I mean, fibroids is a whole different thing. And yes, that's potentially necessary, or surgical intervention is necessary for fibroids, depending on how big they are. Yeah, my mom had a hysterectomy and has a huge hormonal imbalance. Again, the hysterectomy doesn't solve the hormonal imbalance, everyone. The hormonal imbalance is causing the symptoms. You've got to address the hormonal imbalance. You got to know what it is and then take action from there. So, okay, so we have more questions here.
Okay.
And we probably got a couple. You want to take like another 5 more minutes or so? So I feel like we could keep going. This is like 5 hours. 5 hours later. Okay, can we talk a little bit about the treatment side of things? So we talked about the birth control pill. We've talked about hysterectomies. Seems to be the going thing. What have you done? Let's maybe talk about that, because you're clearly thriving in your life, and you have endometriosis, and that seems to be antithesis to what we often hear about endo. Like your doctor had said, it's kind of a life sentence.
Yeah.
But clearly that's not the case. So I would love to hear sort of how you built the team to take care of yourself, because you said that too, like a well-rounded team to take care of you is pretty crucial, if you have access to that. And maybe you don't necessarily even need that, because there are so many people like you who can really help guide someone who does have endometriosis to at least getting to the point where they're feeling more stable and they're not in just this constant state of, just being beholden to their cycles every month.
Correct. And that's part of what I'm trying to do is, like, I think it's ridiculous that I had to spend as much money on this problem as I did. I would have rather spent all my dollars on something else, to be quite honest. It was very expensive to get through this journey. And the whole time I'm thinking back in my head, this is insane. Like, it shouldn't be this hard to get through this, phase of the process. But I'd say there's definitely like low cost interventions you can do that make a very big difference. And then there are high cost things that make a big difference, but you don't have to go all the way here. Like I said, I spent over 4 years doing the low cost thing, and then eventually did spend a little bit of money on the white excision surgery, which was worth it, but I didn't do it first thing. Like, I did it after a long process of natural things. So I would say that some of the team members that I built over the course, this kind of on accident, but now it's on purpose that I kind of have these people around me, is I did have I recommend a functional medicine or a naturopathic doctor who actually gets endo. Now, I put a preface, actually gets endo, because I say this and then women go find a naturopath, and it's unfortunate the doctor has no idea like what endo is or what they're doing, right? So be careful, make sure they understand like what we're talking about. But if you can find a functional medicine I'm going to say / now there's the term regenerative / functional medicine, like all these terms could be someone who's going to be able to help you. They can help you run tests that look at the things I'm talking about, like your inflammation, like your hormones, like, your thyroid function, like infections, right? Like your immune system, how is it doing? And, if you have 3 active infections, it's not doing so good, right? Stuff like that. So getting to those root cause inflammation drivers with one of those doctors was worth every penny. Spending the money on some of that testing was totally worth it, and cheaper than most hysterectomies, like, really, if you think about it. So just to be clear. So look,
it's a good comparison. It really is.
They're not that expensive. And technology is driving these costs down. This is why I'm talking about so much about femtech right now and everything in my communities. I'm like way excited about driving these costs like down, so that every woman can have access to these tests on a regular basis. Like, these should be the well woman exams of the future. Like, they should just check, how's your inflammation? It's like, don't do a pap smear every time. Like, look at my inflammation, look at my immune system, look at, let's look at things that matter. So make sure you have someone like that that's in your world to help you kind of troubleshoot some of this testing, that people like you and I can help give information, but we don't do the testing because we're coaches. So make sure you find someone who can help you with the testing. Then make sure you find someone who can help you. Like, some of the other things I did that were helpful were some gut analysis and looking at your your diversity in your gut. So really strong links between endo, leaky gut, and dysbiosis, which is basically a fancy word for imbalanced gut flora. So
someone asked really quick about SIBO prior to this, which, you know, I did it just at a podcast episode with This Endo Life with Jessica Duffin, and we talked all about SIBO. So it's coming out soon, everyone. So you can wait for that. But yes, keep going. Sorry.
Yes.
This is so good.
So those people were really helpful, and the gut test was really helpful. And to this day, that's actually one of those things I do pretty regularly is I check up on my gut diversity to make sure that I'm feeding the right bacteria and that the good guys are living and the bad guys are in check, right? And that they're not out of balance.
What are you doing to check on your gut diversity? Because I'm sure someone will ask.
So here's two ways. If you are working with a doctor, I really like the GI 360. It tells a full panel of not only like what spectrum of flora live in your gut, but also what pathogens exist and possible threats. That has to be done with a doctor though. So let's say you have access to a doctor. Viome is a pretty good option. It's like, I think only $150. You can do it without spending all the fees on a naturopath or a functional medicine doc, and they give you the results directly, tell you what foods you need to avoid for a time, and how to better repopulate your gut flora. So
that was Viome? It's Viome, right?
Yeah.
Viome. Okay.
So helpful for me early on because it taught me what foods, it troubleshooted me through the problem with what foods to eat and what to avoid, because they're really different for every woman because our immune system is all different. Like my immune system says, you know, chocolate is dangerous at times, and someone else's is like, oh no, chocolate is my superfood. Like my gut flora love that. So Viome was really helpful to kind of get rid of all that misinformation going on about endo and diet, and it cuts through all that and just tells you you need to avoid bell peppers for 4 weeks, and you go, okay, cool, I'm gonna avoid bell peppers for 4 weeks, you know. And they're doing that through sequencing technology on your microbiome, so it's facts. It's not like made up woo woo. It's like they're looking at actual, you know, it's nice.
That's so helpful. Thank you for saying that. I feel like I did the Viome test a number of years ago. I have to look back and see now, but I feel like it's changed dramatically.
It has
since it first came out. Yeah, so maybe I'll do that. Cool.
Yeah, I'm excited about I always watch the founder of that company because he's doing crazy, cool, new things all the time with AI. So I'm kind of like watching, you know, to learn what he's even working on some mitochondrial testing now to see if you can kind of test for that. Anyway, things that will all help women with endo. So he's
amazing. That's okay. So helpful. And then, wait, where were we going with that? So for testing, keep going.
Things. So other things are, you know, changing my diet to removing gluten. Gluten was really a big issue for me because of the way my immune system and my gut process. I did need to completely eliminate it. You know, obviously we kind of harp on sugar. I don't know that I don't think we should demonize sugar, but yes, if you're eating like, you know, Kit Kats and like processed sugars every day, yes, that's a problem for your gut. So you probably want to clean that up, but having healthy carbs in your diet as a cycling woman is like imperative. So that's a whole nother talk too, but like for that you're getting healthy carbs, but make sure they're from healthy, natural food sources, just not processed, you know, type of foods. Corn syrup's terrible for you, you know, stuff like that. So removing all of those things. And then for me, the big deal is removing harsh inflammatory oils. So that was a big deal.
I knew you were going to say that. It's like so overlooked, and they're everywhere.
One period, and I could feel a difference on that. So of all the like testing I did, I remember back in the day, I was like, whoa, I took out vegetable, hydrogenated, and all the oils from my house. I just got rid of all of them in one day. And that period was the easiest period I'd ever had in my life. So I was like, whoa.
That's incredible. Yeah. That's incredible. Everyone, are you hearing this? I talk about this all the time. This omega-6 oil situation in our society right now is completely out of control. So what oils did you replace it with, and what do you use?
So I use coconut oil. I use avocado oil. I use a little bit of olive, although you gotta be careful with olive depending on how high quality it is. I don't like, you know, do serious high heat cooking in it or anything like that.
Yeah.
And
same.
if you're okay with you know, animal-based products, like you can do grass-fed beef tallow is actually a pretty sustainable oil. I do use a little bit of grass-fed butter still. I do okay with grass-fed butter. It doesn't cause me, I don't have a lactose intolerance. I just have, so if it's a high quality animal product, I I just can't have it if it's, you know, really inflammatory. I have very sensitive inflammatory genes that get very upset if we get that ratio.
Yeah, girl. Me too. I feel like if I had sort of not taken care of myself, I would have at some point gotten an endometriosis diagnosis, because of all, I mean, I had so many of the symptoms. It all really adds up. So, and talking about all the oils too, I'm like, I use exactly the same as you. So just so everyone knows, remember, ghee is fine too. That's another one. But I definitely use the beef tallow, make roasted potatoes and that, to die for. Yeah.
Oh, duck fat. I learned, I went to
yes,
dinner, they fried
exactly.
duck fat, and I had never heard of frying things in duck fat, and they brought them out, and I was with my boss at the time, and he thought it was a total health nut, which I was, but like, you know, everyone in that group was like, you're such a weird health nut, and I'm like, I've never had duck fat. What is duck fat? And I remember, I hate those fries, are the best fries I've ever had in my life, because they perfectly crisp on the outside, but like still have that like gentle, like squishy, like it's like the perfect balanced oil. So anyway, if you're ever frying like healthy duck fat, that's a good fat. So it's really good.
Yes, I completely agree. And so, yeah, someone asked about the ghee. So I feel like ghee is fine too. I just don't like the smell of ghee, so I can't use it. It just makes me kind of nauseous. We're probably going to run out of time in just a second. So is there, let me see, hold on. Maybe there's one more thing. I mean, ultimately, you know, people, oh yeah, let's get back to the team. That's to finish that up. So we talked about the, you know, the functional doctor, a surgeon.
Yes.
I'm curious what other, you know, who else you have, or what other options
there's options coming out now. So, you know, a nutritionist who's actually trained in this kind of stuff and they understand more of a functional nutrition approach can be very valuable. So I've met some really awesome ones lately. They're amazing. So if they're a functional nutritionist who understands endo, that could be useful. If they're trained in old school sort of methods, they're usually not very useful. I kind of have to vet them and see if they're, you know, so nutritionists can be helpful. Functional medicine doctor, naturopath type doctor can be very useful. A surgeon can be useful when you need them. But remember, anyone who's trained in a certain method, usually that's their method of recommendation. So a surgeon's going to recommend surgery. So don't go to a surgeon until you're kind of like ready to pull that trigger and say, okay, we're gonna do surgery, kind of a thing, because they're gonna recommend it. Everyone believes in their craft, and they should. So just know that. Supplements and detoxing my home was huge. So those estrogen mimickers and those toxins that live in your home, that was a big deal. Just slowly going through my house and getting rid of all the toxins. Took me a while, actually, because there was toxins hiding everywhere. Yes.
And they're everywhere. Yeah, I know. It's everywhere. It's real. That is a whole thing. I mean, I feel like, though, like what you're laying out with the food, the oils, as well as the environmental toxins, that alone can massively change your experience with your endometriosis.
Yes, massively.
Yeah.
And then I'd say, you know, learning how to de-stress. So I'm a high octane person. I like to go get things done. I was running a department, getting my master's degree, like, oh, I'm on top of the world. And then my whole system crashed. Well, I wasn't taking care of myself. So of course, everyone preaches, and they're right about sleep. You know, making sure you're getting good quality sleep, making sure you're using blue light blocking. It totally messes with your hormones if you don't get that blue light. You get it right before bed. It's not good for you. So starting to kind of fine tune like circadian rhythm type things really helped. And then working through, I'm trying to think of like working through some of those like more fine tuning things happened later. But if you're still eating processed food and that kind of stuff for your gut, I'd say start there. Then work your way through the toxins in your home. Then do the fine tuning kind of like nerdy, you know, things that are like working on your blue light exposure, working on your stress, learning how to just chill out. Like I took up a yoga class and it was so healing. So now I make myself go to yoga because it teaches me how to breathe, teaches me how to notice when I'm getting too worked up.
Yes, the nervous system support, everyone. If you have endometriosis, I was just talking about this with someone else actually on her podcast a moment ago. And we were just talking about the fact that our nervous systems are just constantly upregulated. And then when you add on a chronic condition like endometriosis, where you're in pain a lot of the time, that sends your nervous system even further into overdrive. So like you said, this constantly working on balancing your nervous system is so critical as well. So I feel like those are 4 good things. And go ahead.
Is your physical therapist. Because after surgery, your pelvic floor is going to need rehab and it doesn't work properly. So a lot of the times at the end of the whole cycle, women tell me, I think my endo is coming back. It's like one of the biggest fears that women have is like, my endo is coming back. And I say, okay,
Yes.
well, are we sure that we're not having some alignment issues? Because what I've learned about myself is that my hips can get out of alignment very easily. And so all they need is to be put back in alignment, and then I no longer have pain. So sometimes it's like a muscle memory / hip alignment issue. So that's where like the yoga and the massage and the physical therapist come in play, where they help you actually understand where you're carrying tension or if your body isn't even in alignment, and that's actually what's causing the trauma. So just to be clear, like it's you're structural and functional, right? So there's the functional problems, but then there's actually structural problems of how we sit too much. We don't have proper alignment. I'm still learning. I'm still a student of this now. I have a friend who's like amazing at this. She's teaching me how to be better in alignment. And so stuff like that really matters, because I'll end up with pain occasionally still in my hip, but it's because
Yeah.
it's.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah,
It's
that's
because, oh, okay. I thought you were saying something else. Okay. Somebody asked about supplements. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, I think that there are probably a few that are useful for everyone, generally speaking, and then there's more specific ones.
Yes, of course, anyone in the women's hormone world can harp enough about magnesium. It's like my best friend. Like if I don't have magnesium in my cabinet, like that's the most important supplement that stays stocked, because I can tell when I have a magnesium deficiency. Pain levels go up just by default because I don't have enough magnesium. So that's so important for so many biochemical processes in your body. Make sure that you have a good quality magnesium. Make sure that you're working with a doctor, but you can do a high dose. Like the worst thing that's going to happen with a high dose magnesium is you run to the restroom and then you know you took too much and then you need to back off. But there's no other really terrible side effects, right, of that. So I'd say that my first supplement I played with that's not too advanced is magnesium. I recommend it for all women to have it in their medicine cabinet. My mom now has one. It's like, Mom, here's your magnesium. And she's like, okay. So there's that. Yes, someone just said turmeric. I love turmeric. I love curcumin. And it is great for period pain. I use it still before my period. I kind of ramp up and I make sure I have enough anti-inflammatory stuff in my diet, and turmeric is one of them. So that's also a really great supplement that's very natural anti-inflammatory that doesn't cause liver or other, like, because we're already having women with endo, we already have liver, gallbladder, gut issues. We don't need prescription medications that make those things worse. So turmeric's a natural way of lowering inflammation without those weird unintended side effects. So that was my other favorite one when I was first starting out. And I can get really nerdy about like the mitochondrial stuff. Obviously, all that stuff is fun. But, like zinc is really good, and we learned that through the pandemic. Zinc is really important. Vitamin D, very. Mm-hmm. I tend to have poor vitamin D levels, even here in California. So I do supplement with vitamin D, and then I go out in the sun as much as I can to try to get it in. So those are some primary ones. I could get really nerdy with all the other like hormone, mitochondrial support stuff, but I'd say if you've never taken it, start with the basics.
I agree. Start with the basics and then sort of work your way up. And also too, we should do a podcast episode on this as well, because you've had so much to share. Okay. Somebody said, thank you, ladies. I'm a 50-year-old woman who lived most of my life with endo and had no idea. I'm an advocate for gaining information for my children and others to help them. Thank you. You're so welcome. Oh, I just love to see this stuff. And April, thank you so much. I feel like we could keep going, but I have a feeling I'm about to get cut off because I think we only have an hour on these things. I cannot believe an hour has gone by this fast, although I guess it's been an hour and a half because apparently we just couldn't get it together. I'm just looking if there's anything else, but I mean, we could keep going, but I feel like there's nothing we can do in the next 2 minutes. So I would love for you to share, where people can find you. You were brilliant. And this was so enlightening, and everyone's like giving us all the hearts. So it's great.
That is nice.
Yeah.
So I finally signed up. So what I did first is I started a support group during the pandemic, especially because, like I said, my heart went out to women with endo, and I was like, I got to help them because there's not a lot of help out there during this time. So you can still find that group. It's over at Facebook. It's Facebook/group/Beyond Endo. And if you have endo or someone you love has endo, or you're just learning more about your body, feel free to join us over there. It's a really positive, awesome community. So you can join over there. I do now have a website, and it doesn't have nearly as much information yet on it. I'm working it's like, it takes a long time to write all this stuff down that I know. So some articles, but I will be writing more. So I do have some articles over at beyondendo.com. And then I am working on my podcast, because I think podcasting is much easier to try to like download like all the things I've learned with the different people I've been sort of privileged to meet on my journey. So I'm trying to work on that too. So you can keep an eye on that, and hopefully we can together kind of spread as much education and information as possible.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you again so much. Everyone who's been on here and asked questions, thank you all so much too. This will be on my IGTV and it will also live on YouTube. So there's, forever more information for everybody. April, again, thank you for your knowledge and for going through all of this and really just like doing the research and figuring it out for all of us. We are all very grateful.
Well, I'm glad it could help someone else because it's, as any woman who goes through this know, it's literally going to hell and back. So I'm like, hey, if I have to go to hell, I might as well at least bring something back for everybody. So I'm hoping that I can save other women some 10 years and 5 years or even 2 years of horror to try to get out of this a little sooner than I did. So anyway, that's why I do that.
Truly. I know, right? You brought gifts for all of us. Thank you for doing that. And everyone, you'll find this again on my IGTV. April, thanks. We will talk again soon. Definitely want you to come on the podcast and have an amazing day. Have an amazing day, everyone. Bye for now.